And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
And we're back, cover 1, the Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown. Joining me as always, CP Christian Page from the comfort of his home, quarantined through coronavirus 2020. What a crazy time to be alive, my man. How you doing?
Man, I'm good. There's only so many naps and showers you can take throughout the day to buy time. And I know that sounds extremely petty, but once you get all your work squared away, then you're just looking at, the same spot on the wall for hours. So it is great to be talking football, and I'm glad the NFL never sleeps. I'm glad the NFL never goes into quarantine.
Yeah, well, not yet at least. I mean, we'll see what happens if anything with the season gets pushed back. I mean, it certainly seems like OTAs are probably going to get pushed back. I'm curious if that means the start of the season will get pushed back, but it seems like everything's matching up so far to go as planned. I mean, free agency went as planned. We'll talk about that briefly here in a few moments. And then obviously we know the 2020 NFL draft will still be held in Las Vegas, just no fans, none of that stuff. Everything's going to go according to plan. But like I said, we're going to talk free agency, so that's what we're going to do. And then we'll talk how some of the trades that have happened this week, how it impacts the draft, and really, the best free agents available and really some players that maybe have caught our eye over the last couple of weeks watching film and where maybe they might fit in the draft. But obviously free agency is a big part of the week, and we are here on a Friday to really recap it the best way that we can. We're not going to go into every signing, but we are going to talk about some of the best and the worst signings thus far. And I mean, me as a Lions fan, I very well guarantee that I will probably go on a rant here in about 10 minutes, I would assume, about the worst signings in the league. But we'll start with the best signings. Just going down the list, I mean, what has been one of the better signings that you think has happened so far?
I'm going to go with a little bit of an underrated signing because I think it did have a little bit of bearing on the draft, and that's the Los Angeles Chargers signing Brian Bulaga to a 3-year, $30 million deal, which to me is relatively cheap, $10 million a year. I mean, did you see what Eric Flowers is getting from Miami? And now you're getting an all-pro caliber tackle with Bulaga at the Chargers, which is a need that they haven't really shored up in quite some time. So I really like that going forward with, potentially a top 10 quarterback in this class. I think that's a really solid signing for LA going forward because they got a lot of pieces on offense. Obviously, I'm sure we'll get to in just a little bit. Melvin Gordon is now in Denver. Austin Eckler signed to a multi-year deal. You have your pieces in the receiving core. And now you're shoring up that offensive line. The defense is solid. So now you find your quarterback, and I think he has a pretty good, or a lot of comfort coming into that situation with Anthony Lynn. So I really like Bulaga, maybe one of the more under the radar signings as far as this free agency period's gone so far.
And it certainly seems like with what they're doing, they're getting some veteran players up front. I mean, Trey Turner they traded for, and I know they traded Russell Okung, but getting Bulaga, you have Trey Turner, you have some veterans in place. I mean, they have moved on from Phillip Rivers. It seems like they're ready to roll with Tyrod Taylor, but that doesn't necessarily mean they won't draft a quarterback. And I'm really starting to turn towards the fact that I think the Chargers are going to consider moving up from 6, probably to 3, and put themselves in position to get Tua. That's just, it seems like a marriage that makes a lot of sense. He would be on the West Coast. He's obviously got family in Hawaii, so it would make travel much easier rather than going from, let's say, Hawaii to Miami, and so on and so forth. But I think that makes a lot of sense. A signing that I really have liked, and it dealt with the trade, was Eric Armstead being dealt to Indianapolis and then them locking him up to a 5-year contract worth $85 million. So many times throughout this draft process, I have said at 13th overall, the Colts will take Derek Brown, Javon Kinlaw, a Senior Bowl guy that they've probably got a chance to meet with and everything else. And then they go out and they make this trade for probably a top 5 interior defensive lineman in Eric Armstead, who is 6'7", 290 pounds. I mean,
DeForest Buckner, you're getting them confused.
Oh, I'm sorry. What am I? Geez, Louise. Either way, yeah. And I mean, we're talking about a guy that is just massive, and he's just so polished. His game is so polished, and this deal, involves a first rounder. So now San Francisco, they not only have, the 31st pick in the draft, but now they have the 13th pick in the draft. But for Indianapolis, they have Buckner. They've now signed Phillip Rivers. And it seems like they're kind of going all in for this year, hoping that it works out. I mean, it seems like every year they are that close every time, but it's not so much of a signing, but that trade I thought was pretty substantial. And I thought it was pretty important in the fact that they were able to make that happen. But the other deal that I really like, and I think it might be a little salty for you, but Jack Conklin, offensive tackle, leaving the Titans, going to the Browns. We know the Browns have needed an offensive tackle for quite some time, and I think Conklin will still play on the right side. I think the Browns are still very much in play to draft a left tackle. I love Andrew Thomas there at 10 if he gets to that point. And Conklin with Thomas and all that, I think would be perfect on both tackle positions. But they signed him to a 3-year, $42 million contract. I think it's a pretty decent contract. $30 million of it's guaranteed. And I think even though he's not exactly the guy that he was when he first came into the league, if he can stay healthy, this is a home run signing in my personal opinion. Do you have another signing that makes a lot of sense?
Yeah, I agree with that one too. Now, given some Browns fans that listen to this podcast don't think he's going to be the savior at that tackle position for Cleveland, because he does have a lot of injury baggage, and that is the only reason why he is walking away from Tennessee. He had a couple decent seasons at Tennessee, but I think he only played a few games, in the past couple seasons, or at least the past handful of games. But still a promising tackle, former first-round pick. So I definitely see the potential there. One of the more interesting ones, and I don't know if it's necessarily one of the better signings, but I guess it's more of a trade, but it was a signing. Austin Hooper, the tight end out of Atlanta. Then you see, Baltimore making the deal with Atlanta to bring Hayden Hurst to Atlanta. But Austin Hooper, a guy that really came onto the scene last year. We knew a lot of his potential coming out of Stanford, and it seemed like he finally put it all together, or maybe just that offense finally made him a priority in a sense. And we saw what production he can really give. So 4 years, $44 million, $23 million guaranteed in the first couple seasons. So that maybe, the third year may be a little lucrative as far as that goes. But it just gives Baker Mayfield another weapon to really identify. But I think one of the more interesting ones, if we're just talking free agency signings, Case Keenum signing for 3 years, $18 million, I think is definitely interesting, because he's a guy that has a handful of starting experience, has kind of been that guy that kind of sits on the bench for young quarterbacks. They can come in and kind of get your team, in a comfortable winning setting if you want to go that far. So I don't know. I don't know what the leash is like with just, a new management coming for Cleveland, and what the leash is on Baker Mayfield right now with Case Keenum signing with the Browns.
Yeah, I mean, the Browns have been very active. I like what they've been able to do. I thought Austin Hooper was a guy that made a lot of sense for like the Cincinnati Bengals. And if they were, going with Joe Burrow, it seems like that's going to be the case. But if they go with Joe Burrow, it made a lot of sense if they surrounded him with weapons, and a guy like Austin Hooper being available and as productive as he is, I think would have, created some really solid chemistry with a guy like Joe Burrow. Two other names that I like, and one, it's a veteran move, but it's a player that still I think has plenty left in the tank, and that's Chris Harris. He goes to the Chargers, 2 years, $17 million, could go up to maybe $21 million. And I think only $7 million of it's guaranteed. So, I mean, this is a guy that was highly coveted in Denver, and then he comes to the Chargers now. And I think this is a player that can play really in the slot, on the outside. I think his game excels in so many different ways, with, just some of the physicality that he brings, the ball skills. So I love that signing for a team that, it just seems like year in and year out, they cannot stay healthy. But, you got a guy like Derwin James coming back from an injury, and now you have Chris Harris. I really like what their secondary is matching up to be. The other move, and I mean, I know some people are not going to like it, but I'm for it. And I cannot believe that Todd Gurley was a free agent. I'm going to be honest. I mean, he's a top 5 running back in the NFL, in my personal opinion. And I know he's got arthritis in his knee, and that thing's going to give out. It's eventually, it's not going to work out for him. But I personally think a 1-year, $5 million deal is certainly the way to go. And the Falcons are getting a guy that is certainly an upgrade over Devonta Freeman and anybody else that they had in their locker room. And you get a guy in Todd Gurley that, I mean, can still produce at a high level. And whether people want to admit that or not, I mean, yeah, he might not be the guy he was 2 years ago, but he's still going to produce at a high level. And at that contract for a team that really had no money at all, I mean, I really like it. I like that move. I think it's something that should maybe rejuvenate him a little bit, and maybe gets him a 3-year deal or something next offseason. And maybe it's with Atlanta, maybe it's with somebody else. I don't know. But I like that move for the short term. And I was a little surprised that it was Atlanta, because I feel like Atlanta still has some holes, but maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. But when you look at it now, I mean, the NFC South is one hell of a division at this point in time. I mean, you have Drew Brees coming back. You have the New Orleans Saints, who re-signed Andrus Peat, their offensive tackle, today. You've got Teddy Bridgewater in Carolina, which inevitably means, the end of Cam Newton there. We don't know where he's going to go, and we can talk about that if you'd like. Obviously, now, like I mentioned, Todd Gurley is there. And then you obviously have Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. So it's like, it's just incredible of how much talent is there, whether it's old, young, injured, it doesn't matter. I just feel like it's an incredible amount of talent there. It's going to be a lot of fun football to watch in the NFC South this year.
Oh, I 100% agree. Yeah, there's a lot of storylines floating around, but there's just I'll leave it at that. There's just a lot of interesting storylines floating around with, Carolina and, Tampa Bay now, with Tom Brady. But, of course, now that shifts gears to where Jameis Winston is, and we'll get to those remaining free agents in just a little bit. But you talked about the running back position with Todd Gurley signing with Atlanta, and now you got Melvin Gordon heading off to Denver, which I like the idea. 2 years, I believe, $16 million. $16 million, 13.5 guaranteed. So I think that's a really good fit for Denver. I know it maybe wasn't a primary need. It was maybe on that lower tier of the secondary needs. But, I've always said it over and over on this podcast that you have a young quarterback, get as many pieces around him to help him, whether that is shoring up the offensive line, like they went and got Graham Glasgow for 4 years, $44 million, 25 guaranteed, which, for an interior lineman may be a little bit of expensive, but I think Glasgow's a fine player to plug into the interior to give some comfort for that running game. And then they hold the 15th overall pick, which they could invest into an offensive tackle, but could also get another playmaker on the outside. You look at players like Justin Jefferson out of LSU, who killed the combine, who has a lot of potential there. You look at somebody even like, Henry Ruggs, that may be a good supplemental piece for Cortland Sutton to be, on the outside and bring a vertical threat that Drew Lock was used to at Missouri. So I think there's a lot of healthy pieces on that offensive side of the ball for Denver to really take that next step forward. Drew Lock looks to be a lot more comfortable. And then just going to the other side of the ball, Denver, I'll take them as a whole. Jarrell Casey, picking him up from Tennessee. He is a little bit expensive, but just shoring up that interior defensive line. Denver and John Elway, I don't know if he got a fire lit behind him, but they did a lot of appropriate moves this offseason so far to put themselves in the right position. And a division that is kind of all over the place outside of Kansas City. You see moves by the Raiders, you see moves by the Chargers, but I really like what Denver's done so far this offseason.
Yeah, Graham Glasgow, I think, was an incredibly underrated move. I think he was not as valued as much, probably because of position. And he's not great. I mean, he's not elite. I know that, but he earned every bit of that contract. I mean, this was a guy that just fought and got better and better every single year and brings some versatility. He can play either guard spot. He can play center. So I really like that move for Denver. I completely agree there. But like you mentioned, I mean, they've made some really good moves. You know, teams that haven't made good moves, how about, you know, I'll get in my rant in a moment, but how about the Houston Texans? And when we go into some of the trades that have happened so far, I think we kind of forgot about it because this week feels like it's been 5 years. And when you go back to earlier in the week, DeAndre Hopkins is traded to Arizona, and they are trading David Johnson from Arizona with a 2020 second-round pick and a 2021 fourth-round pick to Houston for Hopkins and a fourth-round pick this year. I mean, just what is Bill O'Brien thinking? How does Bill O'Brien still have a job? And, I mean, what are the Texans really going to do? They signed Randall Cobb. They have Will Fuller, who can't stay healthy. Their offensive line, yeah, they've got Laramie Tunzel. They've got some promise there, Titus Howard and stuff like that. But, I mean, I just – like, you just took away a young, promising quarterback who's now really a veteran at this point, but a superstar quarterback. You took away his top weapon, who was a superstar, maybe a top 3 receiver in the league, probably a top 3 receiver in the league. You took him away, and you replaced him with a running back who is a shell of his former self. I cannot. When that move happened and there was no first-round pick, it was like, what in the hell is going on, and what is Bill O'Brien doing?
In the most professional journalism way, I'm going to say LOL at the Houston Texans, because I have no idea what their incentive, what their goal was at the end of this free agency period, because none of the moves really make sense from either a short-term or long-term perspective. Because, you know, you hit it on the head with some of the short-term adds or losses. You know, short-term David Johnson, he's only a shell of himself of what he was at an all-pro level, just even, 16-plus games ago. You know, he's just not that high-quality running back that you would thought he would be at this time. And that's, that's a whole nother debate of getting into, the importance of running backs and where they're valued. But we're just seeing, how Stephon Diggs went to Buffalo for a first-round pick. DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, there's every single statistic and attribute out there to claim him as the best wide receiver in the NFL. There's enough going for him, enough angles that you could put him on a pedestal as wide receiver 1 in the entirety of the league. And Houston didn't value him at that way. And Arizona probably did, but let's say, hey, let's just fish around and see what we can get out of him. Sure, I know surrendering the number 8 overall pick that Arizona currently has is very rich, but I think if you're Houston, you at least poke and look at the future first-round picks, because we've seen guys like Amari Cooper, who was solid in his first couple seasons with Oakland, but then on the back end, he had some ho-hum performances, but Dallas was still willing to give him give Oakland a first-round pick. In exchange, now he's a multi-year player for Dallas, and he's made a significant impact in his 1.5 seasons in Dallas. So I don't know. Arizona, congratulations. But Houston, I don't understand the short-term or long-term goals. But if you're looking at long-term goals, you're not valuing Deshaun Watson, and plain and simple, that's the story. That's the synopsis at the end of the day. You have a quarterback that could be one of the best in the league, but you're not valuing him from that perspective, because you're literally banking on him, or banking on his top target being a former first-round pick in Will Fuller that can't stay on the field, and we only see him play at a high level at the benefit of having an alpha dog like DeAndre Hopkins on one side. So I don't get any of the moves that Houston made, because it doesn't better them, no matter how you want to spin it. It does not better them going forward in this situation. Yeah,
and I mean, and they could – put themselves in a position to maybe move up in this draft. They could maybe piece together, pick 40 and 90, or pick 40 and 111, or whatever it is, and do their second and fourth round pick or something. And maybe they get up into the, pick 34, or maybe they get to pick 32. and they're able to get another receiver. But for Houston, I mean, this isn't the first time this has happened for them. This isn't the first time Bill O'Brien has done something like this, and he's giving up assets, first round picks, and not getting anything in return after giving up maybe your biggest asset, and that was in DeAndre Hopkins. But, props to Arizona, who I think has really tipped their hand in a sense that, hey, we're getting a receiver. We're going after some offensive pieces. We've added some defensive players like, Campbell, the linebacker. They gave him an $8 million contract. They signed Devin Kennard, who can play kind of that jack position and be a versatile piece up front and in that front seven. And then you got Jordan Phillips going there, which I really like that signing. I mean, as long as he can stay healthy, he should be able to produce. But I think they're showing here first round, they're going offensive tackle regardless of what they have and what resources they already have at the position, because you have to start investing in keeping Kyler Murray upright. And if you want Hopkins, Fitzgerald, and the playmakers that they have to be the playmakers that you sign them up to be, then you need to obviously get the offensive line working. So they're going to very much be in the position to look at a Jedrick Wills, a Andrew Thomas, and those types of guys. I think Jedrick Wills would be a solid addition to their offensive line if Tristan Wirfs is already gone or they're, where they value Thomas, we'll obviously see. But yeah, that was a stunning move. Some other stunning moves. I already talked Indy and San Francisco. I guess we could talk briefly about San Francisco. They now have 2 first-round picks. Like I mentioned, pick 31 and pick 13. So what do we think that they do, considering, some of the moves that they've already made in free agency? One of those moves, obviously, moving DeForest Buckner. My apologies when I said Eric Armstead, but they haven't really done much. They re-signed Jimmy Ward, and that's pretty much it. So they've been quiet. What do we see them do at 13 and 31?
Yeah, I think that Jimmy Ward signing, that signing alone was a little quiet, but I think that was definitely something at the top of their priority list this offseason, because for a little while, that 31st overall pick, that was teetering to, hey, is this an opportunity where Grant Delpit falls into a really good situation, even though, his draft prospect hasn't been as good as we thought it would be a year ago at this time. But shoring up that safety position, I think, is really good going forward with San Francisco. But similarly to what we were talking about Arizona maybe a couple weeks ago, I think San Francisco needs to look at addressing that offensive line and also maybe just adding another mouth to feed in that receiving core. Deebo Samuel's definitely taken that step forward. Obviously, we know what Kittle can add at the tight end position, but getting more pieces for Jimmy Garoppolo and kind of just finding that true balance that we know Shanahan likes to run. We saw that all the opportunities that those running backs got this season and just kind of being a plug-and-play type of offense. But I think, more mouths to feed on that offensive side of the ball is definitely good going forward. So will they look at wide receiver at 13? I doubt it. Because I think that's a little rich. But, if you see a guy like Henry Ruggs or, Justin Jefferson or, with Arizona now out of the mix at wide receiver at 8, who knows when the first wide receiver is coming off the board. So that could give a really good dynamic playmaker on the outside for San Francisco. So maybe even a guy like Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb could fall in the lap of them. And it's going to be really hard for Shanahan to probably pass that up for an opportunity to see how explosive their offense really can be. Late in the first round, maybe they look at a cornerback. I don't think that would be a bad idea. I don't think reaching for a cornerback would be necessarily part of the narrative if they were to address that late in the first round. But I think there's just a lot of, I don't say a lot of needs for San Francisco, but a lot of opportunities for them to just take the best player available and just really strengthen up that roster.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they have a need at corner for sure, and I think, I know they have a need at defensive tackle, and if they're in position at 13 to look at, Javon Kinlaw or Derek Brown, if one of those guys are there, that's a home run. But if those guys are gone, I mean, I still think it's a home run if they consider, a player like Christian Fulton or CJ Henderson. Maybe 13 is a little rich. I know that they've met with Ross Blacklock out of TCU, so maybe that's a guy they consider at 31 because, I mean, no matter how we slice this up, I think 13 and 31 have to be some type of impact type of player, 2 guys that can play right away, because they don't pick again until like 155, 156 or something in the 5th round. So they wait a long time between, day 1 and day 3 to make another selection. So they've got to be good picks. But another trade that happened, Minnesota, Buffalo trading a 1st-round pick, I believe a 4th and a 5th-round pick of this year as well, and they get Stephon Diggs. Minnesota now has 2 first-round picks themselves with pick 25, which was their original pick, and now pick 22. So we can obviously start with the winner of the trade or the draft picks of the trade, however you want to go about it. But what's your take on this trade, and how did the Vikings kind of recover after trading away maybe their top playmaker?
Yeah, I really like it for Buffalo. I think Brandon Beane, we were talking a little bit before we hit the record button here. Brandon Beane has just done, I don't want to maybe say an exceptional job in his role as general manager, but he's done a pretty darn good job so far in his brief tenure with Buffalo. But I think this is a step in the right direction. We're talking about pick 22 for multiple months about that. Just seems like a destination for a wide receiver for Buffalo. Now you get who I think might be the best route runner in all of football. I don't think that's really a stretch to say, but Diggs, one of the more underrated players, playing in a very familiar, I guess, offensive setting. We can go with that, but now can be that true alpha dog for Minnesota's wide receiver room. So I really like, from Buffalo's perspective, what they did. And sure, they had to give up a few picks, but for a guy that can bring all-pro potential to a quarterback that seems like to be stepping in the right direction, I think that's a really good spin for Buffalo. As far as Minnesota, I think you had to do it. You get that 1st-round pick, so I don't think there's really a loser as far as we're just looking at this trade situation overall. Minnesota, just seemed like there was a little bit discomfort with Diggs, and maybe, I don't know if it's Cousins or just the management, the coaching staff, whatever it was. But it seems like Diggs, maybe not vocally coming out and say it, but he just seemed like he was uncomfortable and didn't want to be there long term. So I think Minnesota did the right thing by shipping him out and getting that 1st-round pick. So I don't think it's necessarily a huge gaping hole for Minnesota, just given what we had expected. But still, of course, just from the personnel loss of Diggs and what he can bring to the table, definitely stings a little bit. But I think they have maybe just enough, personnel pieces there to be okay, to kind of bandage it, of course, with Adam Thielen still being there. Hopefully, we see a healthy year from him, that he can go forward, and we can just see the production there. But again, I don't think anything changes necessarily for them as far as what they need to address in the draft. I still think cornerback is their number 1 priority this offseason. And then also, they're going to have to address the wide receiver position for obvious concerns. So I don't necessarily think there was any loser in this trade, but there's definitely going to have to be some reshaping as far as Minnesota goes.
Yeah, I think Buffalo won the trade. I know they gave up a 1st-round pick, but I just think it was a great way for them to cap off what has been I think a pretty good offseason thus far. Them adding guys like, Quentin Jefferson, Vernon Butler to their defensive line, and then just getting a guy like Stephon Diggs to kind of put the cherry on top is to me everything for that team. They needed a true number 1. They weren't going to get that true number 1 at 21. Probably, or 22, probably not. T. Higgins was a player that they liked. He had a poor pro day. They did not like that. So it's clear that they valued a player like Diggs, and they still have 7 draft picks. They have picks 54, 86, 128, all the way down to 240. So they got 7 picks still. They can still get some value there, players that they can develop. And again, you have Stephon Diggs now, who you have under contract for 4 years, and it's a reasonable contract with what you have left to pay. And I think it's a win-win, especially when you talk about wanting to develop Josh Allen. And we talk about that so many times for this team. But, for Minnesota now, they kind of hit the reset button in the simple term of they have 12 draft picks. They've lost some key guys, especially in their secondary. Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, he's gone. And, Everson Griffin's probably not coming back. And then you lose a guy like Stephon Diggs, who you deal. So I'm curious. They still have some players. Like you said, you have Adam Thielen, you have Kyle Rudolph, Irv Smith, both those tight ends, Dalvin Cook. So there's some certain talent, no doubt. But I think that if, I don't know what their cap number is like, but If there's a receiver out there for them to try to get, I mean, Emmanuel Sanders, if he's available via trade, or if he is a free agent, I think he's available via trade. I don't think he's a free agent, but you got 12 picks. If you're able to put something together and get Emmanuel Sanders there, I think that's worth looking at. But, that's a team now. Minnesota's a team that is certainly going to, with 22 and 25, I think that they're in a position where they could go, best receiver on the board, best corner that's on the board. And if they can get Christian Fulton at 22 and then like a Denzel Mims at 25, I think that's a win-win for them. So, I mean, it might work out in the long run. It just kind of depends for Minnesota on what they get in return now. So they've got to make some good picks. I do like Jeff Gladney a lot for that team. I think he's a Mike Zimmer type of player. So we'll see exactly what happens there. They do have some needs along the offensive line. So again, we'll see what happens there. But talking about teams that have needs across the offensive line, this is time for the rant. So you might as well put the microphone down. And I don't know if we're even going to be talking about anything else after this one, but I don't understand how a team like the Detroit Lions, who have been putrid since 1957, the last time they won an NFL championship, a team that has not done anything in my 28 years of breathing. They've been to the playoffs 4 or 5 times in my life, 3 times over the last 10 years. They got rid of a coach that was 9-7 to get a guy that came in and went 6-10, 3-12-1. Really nice, took a great picture with me. That's all great. But basically has flipped this entire thing around upside down, trading guys like Darius Slay because they didn't get along, and all you got was a 3rd and a 5th round pick. You got rid of a guy like Rick Wagner, who you signed yourself into a big contract, overpaid, set the right tackle market with the contract, and then cut him 2 years later. You didn't even go down the aisle. You didn't even go into the store to see what you could get in return for Rick Wagner. You just cut him. He signs the exact same freaking deal for Green Bay, your division rival, and he's going to light it up for the next 3 to 4 years over there in Wisconsin. But it doesn't matter. You couldn't even get a 4th-round pick out of that. You traded Quandre Diggs, your team captain, your vocal secondary leader, for a 5th-round pick in the middle of the season, and that basically said, hey, we're going to wave our white flag. Then you took Devin Kennard, who had 7 sacks this year, 7 sacks last year, played more snaps than anybody else on the defense, or second most defensive snaps outside, I think, of Darius Slay. You let him walk for nothing at all. You were going to trade him, but basically you had released a statement saying you were releasing him, and then you retracted and said, no, we're going to trade him. Well, once everybody found out that you were going to let him go regardless, why even put an offer in? So it doesn't really matter there. He signs with Arizona for the exact same deal, or actually a better deal, at like 3 years, $21 million. So that's what, 4 guys. 4 guys, you got 3 picks out of it. I don't understand. You let Graham Glasgow, your starting left guard, right guard, versatile player, you let him walk for nothing. You didn't even attempt to re-sign him, and that was inevitable. And then you have guys like Lincoln Tomlinson that you drafted in the 1st round. You traded him. You have so many different players like Larry Warford, who you had was talented. You let him walk for free. He's a stud in New Orleans. And now here you are. You come in, first day of free agency, 5 years, $50 million, and you sign, I'm not even going to say the name. We call him Big V. I don't understand it. A career backup offensive tackle with 20 career starts. You spent $50 million on the guy to be your starting right tackle when you're in a prime position to not only just take an offensive tackle, but you could probably take the best offensive tackle, maybe in Tristan Wirfs at number 3, or you trade back from 3 to 6 and maybe still get Tristan Wirfs. I just don't understand it. And this is a regime that has now gone on, and they've added Harmon from the Patriots. They've added Jamie Collins from the Patriots. They've added Danny Shelton from the Patriots. They re-signed Danny Amendola from the Patriots. I am surprised that this team did not end up with Tom frickin' Brady with the way this thing has gone. Now, I don't agree with what they're doing. I do like the Desmond Trufant deal. I do like that. A 2-year, $21 million deal, $14 million of it's guaranteed. Harmon, very good safety. I understand what they're doing, but I cannot put my head around this. After you trade away a guy like Slay, all you get is a 3rd and a 5th round pick. You overpay for a career backup offensive tackle who's really not that good. I watched 3 freaking games. He's not that good. His footwork can be a mess. His hands are inconsistent. I don't understand this team, and I don't know what they're going to do with this 3rd pick, and I could totally see them doing something completely asinine and make this the worst pick that we ever see in the history of football, because it's the Detroit Lions, and they're god-freaking awful. Teams like Denver are doing it the right way. Teams like San Francisco, Indianapolis, Buffalo, they're doing it the right freaking way. And for whatever reason, this team, this franchise just cannot do it. They can't figure it out. And maybe, just maybe, they're in a position to draft a corner for the first time in the first round since 1998, but I guarantee they don't do it. So I don't know what to say, but by far, this team is doing some of the most asinine decisions over the last 6-7 months, and it goes back to free agency now. I just don't understand how I can even get excited for the draft with this team, because the players that they have, I don't see it panning out. And you got a quarterback coming off of a bad back, a back surgery, and you sign a right tackle. You let go of a right tackle that's in your system, in your offense. You let go of your right guard that's in your system, in your offense. You don't do anything to replace these guys. And now your quarterback's got to have confidence when he's going to get drilled time and time again. I don't understand it.
I like what Atlanta did with Dante Fowler. No, I'm just kidding. But that is true, because I think it affects the draft, because, we penciled in Atlanta to get a pass rusher there multiple times. But I don't know. Detroit's in that situation. I'm still on board with them moving out of that 3rd spot to open up for some, team that needs a quarterback, depending on, the Tua Tagovailoa saga is going on right now, where he still may have a private workout. But, of course, it's not going to be as publicized as it was, in the past with all the coronavirus stuff that's going on. But I still think Detroit's in prime position to trade out of that pick. And like you said, maybe they're fortunate and get an offensive lineman to fall in their lap, depending on, who's on the other side of the trade deal. But yeah, and it was funny at first with Detroit signing all these former Patriots. It's like, oh, haha, we get it. And that was probably a good approach for Matt Patricia, doing what he's comfortable with. But now, entering, what is it, year 3, year 2 now, whatever it may be.
3.
Yeah, year 3 officially. It's getting a little tiresome, and it hasn't really worked. And so, I'm with you.
And what makes it worse?
What
makes it worse? And I don't know if this is true. I mean, I've been blocked by Darius Slay on Twitter. I've been unblocked by Darius Slay on Twitter. But what makes it worse is he gets traded. 24 hours later, he goes on WJR, our AM sports talk station here in Detroit, and he goes and he rants and he raves about the coach and how he was throwing him under the bus in film, in practice, and just making a ton of inappropriate comments towards Darius Slay, which made the relationship go sour from the very beginning, from day one. And then that's what made the relationships with other players go sour. I mean, this was a 9-7 football team that had been in the playoffs 2 out of 3 years before Matt Patricia came on board. And then he comes on board and they suck. And they're overpaying for guys, and they're letting guys walk. Like, I'm not saying Devin Kennard is a key player in the regards of, he's the best edge rusher in the world, but when he's playing over 900 snaps for your team, he's producing 7 sacks. I don't understand what in the hell they're doing, and I cannot figure out for the life of me that a team that now, they've got some draft capital. They've got 4 picks in the top 85. They've essentially got 5 picks in the top 100. But I just cannot understand what they're doing to say, like, we're going to come and compete, because the picks that they make are not panning out. They're reaching every time. And if we get into round 2 and they do another Jelani Tavai type of thing, I'm going to lose my mind. And if they trade down from 3 to 6 and they draft a skilled position player, I'm probably going to lose my mind again. And I love Judy and Lamb, but I don't want those guys at 3, 5, 6, 7. I don't care. I don't want a receiver. I want defense. And I just have a funny feeling that this team is not going to do that. something tells me that this team, with what they have, they're going to screw this up. And I just cannot, I don't know. Maybe it's just being in self-quarantine for all this time that I'm cooped up in the house and I need to go out and get a breath of fresh air. But this team, they make the most asinine decisions. How can you go into free agency and pay a guy with 20 career starts $50 freaking million? I don't understand it. I'll never understand it. And I get it. His contract's really not that bad. In 2 years, you can let him walk for basically, no harm, no foul. But I don't get it. I don't get it. I can't understand it. I don't know. But I want to talk about your team. We'll move on, and then we'll go to best free agents available real fast. But your team, they signed Vic Beasley. They've signed Ryan Tannehill. Do you have any ranting and raving about your Tennessee Titans? Because I think Vic Beasley is actually a very good signing on a 1-year deal.
Yeah, I think so. If we see some kind of resurgence from him, and it's weird to say resurgence when he's only on a second contract, but it's no secret that he didn't pan out the way that Atlanta had wanted him to with that first-round pick, a few years back. But I think if he's put in a situation, I love what Vrabel did with like Cameron Wake last year, which I think he only played pretty much on third down, but he added a lot of, veteran experience, obviously with Wake being, one of the best sack artists of all time. I don't think it's a stretch to say that, but putting him in a situation to thrive as a pass rusher, I think Beasley could be put in that same situation. It's a little rich for me, but I think for 1 year, they're not going to have any, cap casualty going forward. So I think, it's kind of, hey, prove us wrong, and then maybe we'll commit to you long term. I do like that fit from a scheme perspective for Beasley going forward. With Tannehill, we'll address the elephant in the room. Is it super rich for a quarterback that's limited? Yep, it is. But, what we were saying before the podcast started, Russ and I we were talking about how literally and figuratively, you're paying his respects because he got you to a situation to put you into the Super Bowl. Sure, we know that was Derrick Henry. It's not a secret to say that. But Tannehill having just that trust factor, not having to do too much, but still being able to rely on him, on key third down situations to be able to extend plays with his athleticism. I think it was the right decision to go Tannehill long term. Could this be egg on their face down the road, maybe in year 2? Sure. I think it's just natural to think that way. But when you look in hindsight, it's like, well, maybe that is the right decision. Maybe they knew that they weren't going to be in on the Tom Brady sweepstakes, when having to tag Derrick Henry, and then probably, looking forward to him being the top paid running back a year from now. I don't think Tennessee really did anything wrong. I think they could have gotten something a little more for Jarrell Casey instead of a late-round pick in the exchange with Denver Broncos, but Casey was still making $12 million a year. So maybe there is something. I don't know what their cap situation's looking at right now, but maybe there is another player down the road that they could sign. And I know Jadeveon Clowney is one of those guys that's still on the market, probably the top free agent on the board right now. I think Tennessee is definitely looking toward him and seeing what they can do from a financial standpoint to find him in a very feasible situation. So Tennessee, I think they made decent moves. Sure, there are some stretch moves, but I think Tennessee still, their roster is good enough to still compete for that division title.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, they draft relatively well every year, and I think that they're in a position at 29 to maybe it's an offensive lineman, maybe it's a corner. I would assume it's a corner at this point. Logan Ryan's gone, and I think just with some of the resources that they've added up front, you could add something in the secondary and put it all back together, and hopefully it all gels for another year to compete in that division. I like that you mentioned Clowney. I think he's certainly the best free agent out there, but I want to throw 3 names at you. Where do they land? And we'll close on that. So Jadeveon Clowney, Jameis Winston, and Cam Newton. Where are they either getting traded to, getting signed to, where are they playing next year?
Man, that's tough. The market for them, just especially going for the quarterbacks, we were talking to before, maybe we should just hit the record button immediately when we pick up the phone, because there's a lot of good content that we talked about. Yeah. But before the show, we were talking about, what's the market for Jameis Winston? Because, he brings a lot of production. He brings a ton of experience, and he brings a lot of talent. Let's be frank. He brings a lot of talent to the table. for a team that needs to be built already around him, as far as, weapons go, as far as, shoring up that offensive line, because, when he panics when that offensive line collapsed, and it wasn't, the Tampa Bay's offensive line wasn't great. And so, Jameis Winston, if there is a situation that needs a quarterback that has a solid up front, then maybe that's the best spot for Winston. I don't know who that is. We briefly talked about maybe the Chargers because they have those pieces in place. I know they're going to go forward with Tyrod and probably draft a quarterback to kind of just mend or bridge over from Tyrod Taylor. So I don't know. I mean, there's no reports right now, maybe given the virus that's going around, but there's no reports that Winston is, having consistent visits with teams that are interested in him. It seems like a lot of QB-needy teams have at least landed somebody, at least for time being. You look at Indianapolis that wasn't gung-ho on Brissett going forward. They sign a one-year deal for Phillip Rivers. You look at Carolina that Cam's no longer going to be with, and then they sign for Teddy Bridgewater for a few seasons. And obviously Tampa Bay's not, looking forward to Jameis, or I don't know what that situation is going to be like with Brady now. But as far as Cam too, I don't know. I don't know what the market's out there. I mean, I think Winston, there's a little more upside because of his age and, the production, and I don't want to say consistency, but consistently being on the field. That definitely helps. But with Cam, he comes a little bit of, just the media mishandlings, if you want to go that far. Some of his style of play is it's not unique as it once was when he was successful. So I don't really know what the market is for those guys. So I can't really answer your question because I don't know how attractive they are to teams right now.
Yeah, I mean, I like Winston to either the Chargers or the Patriots. I think those make the most sense. And I just simply think a guy like Josh McDaniels could make it work with a guy like Jameis Winston. Obviously, Bill Belichick will be playing a role in that as well. But with their ability to run the football, and, I know they don't have great weapons there, but Edelman, you've got in Kaiir. If, maybe they've got plenty of draft capital, so maybe they can put themselves in a position to get, a couple of extra weapons around a guy like Jameis Winston. They still have Mohamed Sanu. So, Edelman, Sanu, the running game, and Michelle and Damian Harris, and you got James White. So, I know it's not going to be Brady, but Winston there, I think, makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the Chargers, you've got Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, the weapons, again, that are there make a lot of sense for them. But for Jadeveon Clowney, that's a tough one. His market's been quiet. There's been really no implications of where he's going or indication of where he's going or where he's meeting. Obviously, the teams that have the most cap money are Cleveland and Miami. The Colts are up there as well. I would have to think, teams that are willing to spend some money would make a lot of sense there. Maybe the New York Jets. They have a need for an edge rusher. Maybe they're able to make a splashy move there. I kind of circled back to a team like the New York Giants, just because I feel like they could use an edge rusher. And if they went defense like an Isaiah Simmons, you add a Clowney, some of the defensive moves that they've had already, James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, maybe they can kind of restructure that defense a little bit. And I'm kind of curious on if like John Gruden, Mike Mayock, the Las Vegas Raiders, if they would be in a position to even consider him as well. They've got 2 first-round picks. They've got some draft capital. Maybe that's a splashy move that they make. I think Clowney, people still are intrigued just by the name alone. So I would say, maybe Raiders, maybe Jets for Clowney. And then for Cam, who knows, man? Carolina trading with Chicago made some sense, but obviously Chicago went with Nick Foles. So, obviously you'd have to say Chargers, you'd have to say Patriots, but I like Pittsburgh for Cam. I think Steelers for Cam make a lot of sense. Again, I don't know exactly where their cap situation is at in Pittsburgh. I think they're in at least a decent position to where they could bring on that contract, and they have some players there. You've got Juju. Actually, they're not in a good position at all. They've only got $3 million, so they probably won't bring him on. But, they've got Juju. They've got James Conner. They just added Eric Ebron. That would make some sense, but they would have to probably get rid of some guys in Big Ben with if they let him go, $45 million dead cap hit, probably not going to happen. So, I guess, Pittsburgh's not going to be the team. But you would have to think the Chargers and the Patriots would land with Winston or Cam Newton at this point. So we'll see. But other than that, I don't have anything. That's our free agency recap. We'll get into some draft stuff. Maybe sometime this weekend we'll do a draft episode, or obviously next week when we quarantine ourselves some more. Do you have anything else for me, my man?
I think we hit pretty much everything. I think just the only just relaying all this back to the draft, the only draft picks in the first round that were compensated, or however you want to phrase it. Indianapolis gives up their 13th overall pick for DeForest Buckner that we talked about. Buffalo gives up their 22nd overall pick to Minnesota for Stephon Diggs. So now we have teams without first-round picks. We have the Colts, the Texans, the Bears, the Steelers, the Rams, and now the Bills. So the Colts still at the 34th overall pick. So I think they did a really good job this offseason. So they can still maybe get, a wide receiver there early in the second round. But, so still we have a handful of teams without first-round picks. So that means we have a handful of teams with multiple first-round picks. So that's always definitely fun at this time of year.
And the Bills are the best team of all of them. So we'll see. I'm sure that'll make our subscribers very happy, which, of course, you guys can become subscribers by going to cover1.net. Go to the premium content tab, become a subscriber. It is literally $10 for the entire year. So what are you waiting for? Like, you get paid content for $10 for the entire year. And it's not just like, a little bit more of like, oh, this guy's a good fit here. No, we show you the why. We give you the X's and O's. We break it down for you. We give you some really good insight, some deep insight from film reviews, player interviews, all types of stuff. Plus, you get access to our Slack channel where you can interact with us, ask any draft question you want. We will respond probably within 24 hours, but normally relatively quick. CP's always in there. So please do that. Become a premium subscriber today on cover1.net. Be sure to smash the follow button on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft, @_Christian Page. So CP, my man, thank you for taking the time to speak with me on this Friday evening as always. So you guys be safe out there. Do not get sick. Please do not get sick. And obviously keep washing your hands and self-distance and all the good stuff. So until next time, this is Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast.